Welcome to our Wednesday Bible study, December the 10th of 2025. Glad you're here. You might want to open your Bibles to James chapter 5 as we're going to get into the last chapter of this great book on practical Christian living. We've discussed the first 4 chapters. We've made application to even our lives today. Even though James had a particular audience in the first century in his purview as he was writing directly to them, as with any passage of Scripture, there is some application to you and I today. God's Word is always applicable. And so we've made that application. Now we get into chapter 5, and we begin to close out this great book. Now, as you're turning there, let me invite you to our in-person Wednesday Bible study. As always, every Wednesday night, 7 p.m., we'd love to have you come and be with us in our open Bible discussion. We do take time to sing praises to God. We take time to pray and even to make prayer requests so that when those prayers are made, we can address those particular requests that are made. But then we open up God's Word and we study from it. We've recently begun looking at the Psalms, the great Old Testament book of Psalms. We're still introducing the book. There's a lot of material to look at in the introduction, but we're getting close to actually digging into the text and really looking at some of these Psalms. And so we'd love to have you come and be a part of that open Bible discussion. We'd also love to see you on Sunday, on the Lord's Day. Come worship God with us as we assemble at 10 a.m. for a period of Bible study. Then at 11 a.m. for a period of worship where we engage in all of the New Testament acts of worship the way God has asked us to worship Him or demanded that we worship Him, as He is a spirit and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. John 4:24. We open the truth, we understand how to do it, and then we do it. And so we'd love to have you come and be with us for New Testament worship. And then at 6 p.m. on Sunday evenings, we assemble again. Now this coming Sunday, we're actually having a dinner together following the morning worship period, and then we'll meet for an evening worship at 2 p.m. But most Sunday nights, it is at 6. Now, let's get to James chapter 5. You might recall that in the last chapter, chapter 4, verse number 13, what we discussed last week, he began that section by saying, "Go to now." When you open up chapter 5 and you begin reading in verse number 1, he's again going to say, "Go to now." That particular phrase does 2 things here. Number 1, it calls attention to a new subject matter. So obviously he is wanting them to really pay attention to what he is about to say. The second thing it does, though, is connect it back to the previous. Both of these sections, chapter 4, verse 13 through 17, and now chapter 5, verse 1 through 6, is going to be connected because it says go to now. So one of the things you might want to look at and comprehend is, what is the connection? How do these 2 parts go together? Now, obviously, in James chapter 4, we had looked at the plans of life and the attitude that men have toward their life planning. And so we broke that text down last week to understand that it's not wrong to make plans. We need to make plans. We don't need to just go through life haphazardly in such a fashion where we're just going along with the wind, wherever it blows us, wherever it lists, we go. Rather, we have a definite plan for life, but with those plans, we always need to keep in mind, if the Lord will. Everything we do needs to be advanced on, is it the Lord's will, and let the Lord's will be done. And so we talked about the right attitude in planning. Well, we're still talking about attitude, and now it's going to be our attitude toward material things. Now, we're going to have to approach it from the standpoint of, what is James really focused on here? Or who is he really focused on? But nonetheless, there is a disposition toward material things. Whether you have them or whether you don't, you have to have the right disposition toward material things. And so there is that connection, the right purpose or the right attitude in planning, and then the right attitude toward material things. Because so often our planning is driven or motivated by materialism. So we've got to be very careful about it. They're separate subjects, but they naturally connect. An improper attitude in planning and an improper attitude regarding material things. Now, let's ask this question. Because he does say, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl," and so forth. And throughout that text, there's going to be three specific problems regarding material things that he's going to address. The question is, why is James writing this? Is he writing it because his readers need to be corrected, that they stand to be corrected? Now, in chapter 4, verse 13 through 17, there was some correction there, and a presentation of how to make the correction, what they needed to do. That in their way of living, there was lack of consideration for the Lord's will. So here's what you need to do to correct that. Begin to implement the Lord's will in all of your planning. Do all of your planning with that. And then he says, "Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin." So he rounds out his discussion there with a responsible action, or a way to responsibly respond to what he has said. In chapter 5, verse 1 through 6, is that the case? Is that what he's doing? Is he rebuking his readers? Or is he maybe doing something a little different? In the Greek language, and we have it in English too, there is a figure of speech known as apostrophe. And what this is, the word literally means to turn away, to turn here. So normally I'm looking here toward you. My eyes are focused forward unless I'm looking down at my notes or reading the text of Scripture. But if I were to turn this way and begin talking to someone over here, I have turned away. Now, I might be doing that for the sake of executing a message toward you. There were even times where, to emphasize maybe even to my children that I have a message that you need to receive, I might turn and say something to the walls. Let me talk to the wall for a minute. And just in a way, speak something to the wall, but as though I was talking to the wall, really I was talking to them. Is there a message to be given here where James would turn and address those that he styles as rich men, but the rich men he is addressing is not necessarily the individuals that he is writing to? And I would submit to you that may be, and probably is, exactly what James is doing here. Note in verse number 7, "Be patient, therefore." Remember how in verse number 17 he talked about the response to what he had said regarding their attitude toward planning? "To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin." That was a direct message to his readers. Here's what you need to do. But now, when he tells them, here is what you need to do, he says, be patient. Why would they need to be patient? Well, he's going to talk about the rich having condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. In all likelihood, James is turning away, as it were, to speak to the rich men. Though they're not the recipients of his message, he's turned in this form of speech apostrophe to talk to the rich men so as to encourage those that are being oppressed by the rich men. He's addressing the rich men as a separate group from his audience to whom he's writing, to produce an encouragement. That's why he says, "Therefore, be patient." Because this is true regarding these rich men, well, you need to proceed with patience. Here's how you need to respond to these things. So, while he is talking to people being oppressed and encouraging patience in them as they're facing that oppression at the hands of these rich men that he's talking to, or talking about anyways, he's also helping them not to develop the wrong attitude toward material things or toward materialism. So there is a twofold purpose here, or a twofold strike, you might say, where he is trying to encourage. That's probably the predominant purpose because of what he says about be patient, therefore. And then he's also encouraging or presenting to them in practical Christian living, you've got to have the right relationship with material things. You have to have the right attitude toward these material things. So James is probably, rather than rebuking his readers, he's more encouraging them by turning, as it were, toward a group of rich men that are oppressing them, as opposed to rebuking them for being these rich men. Either way, there's application to be made and there's lessons to be learned. Now, there's something else before we break down the text that we need to note. James is not condemning wealth in general. Sometimes people get in their mind a thought that wealth is wrong. That an individual having some kind of riches, some kind of wealth, some kind of high economic standing, somehow makes them wicked, vile individuals. And with our society now, political arena, there's a whole lot of demeaning the rich or making the rich out to be these cruel, and maybe in some cases they are. It was in the case where James is addressing certain rich men, but James isn't saying that all wealth is that way. Now consider this. He's going to be addressing three particular problems. And where these three particular problems exist, or where any of these problems exist, you're going to see a lack of morality. You're going to see an immorality. You're going to see a vileness. You're going to see a wickedness. But that's not every single wealthy individual. In this case, rather than a broad condemnation of riches, he's focused three particular areas. Now, you also understand that material things are neutral. In and of themselves, they're neither good nor bad. There's nothing inherently wrong with gold or silver. There's nothing inherently wrong with garments. Those are some of the things he mentions here regarding wealth. Nothing wrong with having clothing. After all, we have to be clothed. But there is a problem that erupts as it pertains to our attitude toward them and even toward the acquisition of them. Our mindset and activity regarding these material things. So, neither good nor bad. In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, a passage that often is misquoted. A lot of times the passage is quoted this way: money is the root of all evil. Just simply put, money's the root of all evil. That's the way people interpret it. That's the way people often say it. And that's the way people often think about it. But that's not what Paul said to Timothy there. Paul told Timothy that godliness with contentment is great gain, going back to about verse number 6 of that text. But then he says to him, the love of money is the root of all evil. That goes back to the attitude toward that wealth. The wealth itself is not a problem. It's the disposition toward it, the love of money, that desire to have that money is where many end up falling into many foolish, hurtful lusts, and how they pierce themselves through with many sorrows because of the mindset toward it. So material things in and of themselves are neutral. And there's no sin in having a large acquisition of material things, of material wealth. In fact, think about what John prayed for in the book of 3 John when he was writing to Gaius. He actually prayed that Gaius would prosper and be in health. John actually prayed as an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ for the prosperity of Gaius. Now, the reason he could do that in good conscience was because of the character of the man of which he was praying that. Gaius was a man who was in turn going to use those blessings of God, that prosperity, for the furtherance of the kingdom. He was going to acquire it properly, and he was going to use it properly. And he was going to have the right disposition toward it. So John prays for that prosperity, which would tell me that prosperity is not in and of itself wrong. But it does matter how you acquire it. It does matter how you use it. It does matter your attitude toward it. And those things, how you acquired it, how you use it, and what your attitude toward it is what's going to determine whether it's vice or virtue. So we want to know that going in. We want to have the proper understanding of material things from that vantage point. Now, let's talk about what James says here. I'm going to read these 6 verses, and then we're going to point out the 3 problems that he presents here. He says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last day. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." So, what does James present here about the problems of these particular rich men? Why is it that these rich men, in their relationship to material things, are wrong? Which in turn is going to answer the question for us, how should we properly relate to these material things? Well, problem number 1, when he says, "Go to now, consider this matter, ye rich men," is that material things are temporal. So why put your trust in them? And notice again what he says. "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl." The idea of weeping and howling is the presentation of great crying aloud. Just the idea of that grief pouring out in the sounds that are made because of their misery. But what's caused their misery? Well, he breaks that down, that, what's caused their hardship, what's caused their suffering, what's caused their great distress in this matter. Why would that come? Well, it's because of the nature of those material things. Notice he gives 3 categories: riches, garments, and then gold and silver. So the word riches here is going to be something that is distinct from the garments and the gold and silver. Now, they're rich men because of the riches, because of the garments, because of the gold and silver. So what are these things? What do we mean by riches? These riches that are corrupted. The word corrupted means to be rotten or to rot, to decay. So what is it that would become rotten? What is it that would become decayed? And if you look into the first century particularly, their riches were actually in different subsets, different things. Now, obviously, gold and silver are part of that, but you could also have in the clothing, the garments, a set of wealth. But in the riches, you're looking at something that is probably in the nature of grain, the nature of oils or food. Those were things that were susceptible to corruption. Even the garments could become moth-eaten, destroyed by moths. Conditions may have been different then, and now it's possible that even in our sealed houses, if you will, with our cedar closets or otherwise closed-in, bug-free houses, I understand that no house is 100% bug free, but we go to great measures to keep out pests. Now, my wife and I will have our house sprayed once a month to prevent insects from being able to thrive within the confines of our house. That doesn't mean they don't get in. Now, they might be dead when you find them, but you're still going to find a spider once in a while. You're going to still find a ladybug. You're still going to find a fly or other things that may get in. But we're well advanced from their potential storage conditions of that first century, and the idea of moths getting in, while they could get in to our closets today, not as likely, but could still happen. If they get in there and begin to eat away the fibers of the clothing, you have holes in your clothes, which render them no longer valuable, no longer good. Now, with your grains, your oils, your food, they're such as tangible, and they're also such that they can decay. They have a shelf life, and they can only be sustained for so long before there is rot, before there is mold, before there is decay. And so the point he's making there is, in all of these things that you put your confidence, all of these things you put your trust, all of these things that you focus your entire attention upon, they're going to be corrupted. They're going to decay. They're going to rot, which means they're temporary, they're temporal, and you're not always going to have them. You may have it today, but you may not have it tomorrow or 10 days from now. Your gold and silver is cankered. Now, I understand, as the word cankered means rust, and he then says, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you. I understand that gold and silver technically don't rust the way iron or other metals might, certain steels and stuff like that. However, they can tarnish, and maybe he's using a figurative idea here, not so much being susceptible to rust, but can be improperly held. And so to corrode, to tarnish from long storage or lack of use. It's not as shiny today as it was when you first acquired it, and maybe it's not as luxurious as you once thought it was. But nonetheless, all of these things are tangible. All of these things are temporary. All of these material things are such that they can be here today, gone tomorrow. So then he says in verse number 3, the rust of them shall be a witness against you. Now, what does he mean with that? Well, if it's not used as it should be, or not being used at all, and it shows that corrosion or that corruption, that shows then a lack of use or a misuse of it. And it demonstrates that you're not using those material things properly. It might also be viewed as a witness to their own demise, because he goes on to say, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Now, obviously there's the sense of destruction here, the burning of the flesh, or the eating as it were fire. It may be the agony at loss. You know, you've put all your stock in that grain, and you put all your stock in those garments, and you put all your stock and hope in that gold and silver, only to find it to be tarnished, only to find it become rotten. And now there's agony because you've lost your wealth. It's all gone. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon talked about it. And when he thought life was centered on the acquisition of material things, he found it to be a vexation of the soul. Because there were two things that he pointed out that vexed his mind. One was losing it. What if I lose it? What if somebody steals it? What if it's no longer in my possession? And number two, what am I going to do with it when I'm gone? Will those who I leave it to, who acquire it after I'm gone, will they pay it as much attention as I do, or will they squander it? And those were two agonies that were on his mind, things that vexed his mind back in the book of Ecclesiastes. So, eating the flesh as fire may have something to do with that loss, that agony rather, at its loss, that you're in a constant state of worry. If you put all your trust in those things, and there's that potential for loss, there's the guarantee of loss of certain things, but it could also be a witness as it pertains to your destruction. Just as sure as those material things are destroyed or lost through decay and rot and tarnishing, that you too would be so punished. And in the Greek, the word flesh is actually plural, so it indicates every part being punished intensely or terribly. And of course, in Matthew chapter 5, he talks about that, how the whole body could be cast into hell. Or Matthew 10:28 with that same idea, the idea of hellfire engorging or encompassing the whole of who we are, the whole person. So whether it be the agony that comes from knowing that it's transient, it's temporary, and you're doing everything you can to preserve it, and then you agonize over what will happen to it when you're gone, you bring a lot of decay to yourself. Just like 1 Timothy chapter 6 talk about, they that love money are going to pierce themselves through with many sorrows, and they're going to be such that they come under much evil. So rust is a witness that eats away their flesh. But then also the ultimate destruction, if that's what you put your trust in, it's not going to save you. It cannot provide you that eternal salvation, so you're going to be destroyed anyways. What's the answer to the problem? You know, as we said, James here he didn't present this as a rebuke to his readers. It was more a turning away to provide them encouragement, but from the standpoint of what's the fix. You know, in the first place, when he rebuked them in chapter 4, he told them what to do to fix it. Here he doesn't do that. But we still would ask the question, how can we prevent those miseries that would prevent, or would cause rather, that howling and misery? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. From the standpoint of this individual who is being oppressed, you know, you take the point from verse number 7, be patient, therefore. What will help provide that patience as an answer to that problem that is being faced? Well, remember, God will avenge. In Revelation chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, he talked about how the souls of them were crying from beneath the altar, saying, how long until there is the avenging of our blood? Those faithful martyrs crying from beneath the altar. And the idea was that the Lord would avenge them. So understand, the Lord is going to ultimately take care of this. These individuals who have put their confidence and trust in these riches to the extent that they have brought oppression to the saints, to the faithful, he says they'll be avenged. That should help bring patience. But then he also speaks to the idea that, well, he doesn't, but the Bible does speak to the idea that we should remember that the world is temporal. If we want to stay out of that mindset where we trust in material things, we need to remember the temporal nature of these material things. And that's what he's pointed out in verse 1 through 3. Remember in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9 through 12, he talks about how this earth and all that is herein shall be burned up. All of this is going to be gone. You think about everything in this world that you love and that you take pleasure in. I like to deer hunt, I like to spend time in the woods. I enjoy the outdoors. But you know, there's coming a time when all of that's going to be destroyed. Nothing wrong with finding serenity in it. Nothing wrong with enjoying it. Nothing wrong with giving consideration to the greatness of the Creator who created all of it. But if that's what I'm living for, because some people do live to hunt, that's all they do. That's their whole purpose in life, or fish, or whatever it may be in the great outdoors. The whole life is geared toward those things. One day all of that's going to be gone. Then what are you going to do? Where are you going to find your peace then? Whether maybe it's, serenity on the golf course, because your whole life is geared toward that. Or your whole life is geared toward the pursuit of material things through your job or other things like investment and so forth. You make your whole life about all of that to the exclusion of things that actually eternally matter. All that's going to be burned up. It's all going to be gone. All of that material stuff is going to be no longer existent, because the earth and all that is therein is going to be burned up. It's going to be dissolved, going to pass away with a great noise. The elements melting with fervent heat. Some misinterpret 2 Peter as though it's going to be a refining fire. Oh, no. The language of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9 and 10 speaks to a dissolving and an annihilating of this earth, of all this materialism. And you might say, well, what about the new heaven and new earth that he mentions? Well, frame it this way. What is the heaven and earth to us now? It's our habitation. It's our dwelling place. The heaven above us, the atmosphere, the sun, moon, and stars, and outer space, and then this globe, this sphere, this earth that we live upon. This is our habitation right now. Well, one day, this habitation that we currently have, because of its temporal nature, material nature, is going to be gone. And we look for a new habitation, a new heaven and new earth. Not this one being refined, but a new dwelling place that is distinct and different from this place. So if you invest all of your time and energy, and you make your life's purpose to focus on material things, to the exclusion of spiritual things, the things of God, the sacred things, and all you focus on is the material things, what are you going to do when it's all burned up? So what we need to do is keep in mind always that this world is not our home. It's a temporal or temporary existence. And that'll help us shape our mindset toward material things. We also want to remember that the love of money is the root of all evil. We want to remember that to have the wrong disposition toward material things leads us into all kinds of evil, every kind of evil. And that's also going to pierce us through with many sorrows, according to 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. So if we want to avoid those sorrowful things, now some things we just can't avoid. It's just going to be a part of this life we live. But there is a means by which we can avoid certain reasons for suffering, and avoiding or having the right attitude toward material things is going to help save a whole lot of trouble. We won't pierce ourselves through with those sorrows. So answer the problem, both to the afflicted and to the afflictor. Remember, God will avenge all of that wrong disposition toward material things. Remember that this world is not eternal, it's temporal. And remember that the love of money leads to all forms of evil. It's the root from which every kind of evil springs, and it results in great sorrow. All right, problem 2. When it comes to this trust, well, in material things, or this focus on material things, remember that the means of acquisition of these material things can be wrong. Back to verse 4. He says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." So what's happening here? How did these rich men acquire and hold on to their riches? Is there is there right ways to go about it? Is there just ways in which wealth can be acquired? Absolutely. But there's also wrong ways. Having wealth doesn't necessarily mean that you were evil in acquiring it. But if it was evilly acquired, then it's wrong. Notice in this case, the hire of the laborers. That is the agreement that you had. Here's your wages. Here's what you will be paid for this work. So the laborers are hired. That's the idea. They've agreed to terms. And the hire here, that's the term that they have agreed to. They reap down the fields. So they've been brought into the employ of this rich man for a set wage. They do the work, but they don't receive their pay. Because the hire, which is kept of you by fraud, the hire is kept from those workers, those laborers. So you hired them, they did the work, but you gave them no pay. And by so doing, you held on to your riches. And he says this too is a witness against you, because he says that in and of itself, that action crieth against you, comes up to me as a cry for avenging. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. So I have seen what you've done. I've seen your action. It cries to me for justice. And I hear those that you've wronged crying out for justice. And thus, I'm going to respond. Now, as far as the Lord hearing the cry of the innocent, this was early taught in Scripture. In the Old Testament, we have example of God hearing. You know, in Genesis chapter 4, you have the occasion where Cain rose up against his brother and slew him. Now, after that event took place, where the murder of a righteous man happened, Abel was a faithful martyr, the Lord approached Cain, called out to Cain, "Where's your brother?" And of course, Cain's response was, my brother's keeping. Am I the one that's supposed to be looking out after him? And the Lord said, "The blood of Abel crieth up from the ground." Indicating that the Lord knew what Cain had done, of course. But it also indicates that Abel being slain in his righteousness as a martyr needed to be avenged. The blood cries up to me, the Lord said. And of course there would be an avenging, and Cain had it pronounced upon him. Cain complained because he thought the punishment was more than was fitting to the crime. It was more than he could bear. But nonetheless, the Lord avenged righteous Abel. You remember in Exodus chapter 2, 1 and 2, when the murmuring of the Israelites came up unto the Lord, and he remembered his promise. Now, it doesn't mean he forgot what he had said to Abraham. It just implies, it just means that with those cries, it's now time for God to do what he told Abraham he was going to do. Now is the right time. So he hears the cries, the murmurs of his people as they're being mistreated by the taskmasters of Egypt in that brickmaking, as they were making slaves of the Israelites. And the Lord responded, brought them out of Egypt. It was a heavy price for Egypt to pay. They lost their Pharaoh. They lost their army. They even lost a lot of their riches, their wealth, and their gold and silver, because they gave it to the Israelites on the night that they were leaving and departing to go toward the promised land. And so they were spoiled of those goods. But the Lord avenged the cry. So as you think about it, the Lord hears, He knows, and He will respond in His time. Another reason why in verse 7 He says, be therefore patient. Now there's another aspect of that verse that you need to recognize too, because it says, the cries have gone up to the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. And thus, it behooves us to understand, what does Sabaoth mean? The word Sabaoth actually means host or armies, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. And that speaks to His power to avenge. Now it might be, as James is writing to these Israelites that are scattered abroad throughout that Roman first century world, that they are in a position of servitude, or they are in a position where they don't have the power to prevent what is happening to them, the oppression. But they are assured, they're told to be patient, because the Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, is going to avenge. He's heard the cries, and He's going to respond, just like He did to the blood of Abel, just like He did to the cries, the murmuring of the Israelites in Egypt in Exodus 1 and 2. He's going to respond for you too, but on His timetable. But also know He has the power to do it. You may be oppressed by rich men who you cannot challenge, who you are unable in your position to put off or to throw off their oppression. But that's not a struggle for the Lord. He is able to do it. The Lord has heard the cry of the innocent, and He is going to come to the defense of the innocent. And so they needed to be encouraged. They needed to be lifted up. So, let's answer the question, though, of this problem. An answer to problem number 2. The problem was the acquisition of that wealth was dishonest. It was wrong. Now, remember, the Lord is going to respond, so be patient. Understand, if you're the one being oppressed, if you're the one on whose back the rich are getting richer, well, know that the Lord's going to answer that. He'll take care of that in His time. So be encouraged. Be patient, but be encouraged. But also know, from the standpoint of preventing ourselves from entering into that, remember that both employer and employee must respect the wants and needs of each other. Those are the words of the Lord. In Colossians chapter 3, I understand he of course is talking about servants and masters. But again, first century perspective. And a lot of what he says regarding servants and masters could well be applied to the employer-employee relationship. So notice in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22, he said, servants, obey your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as unto the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive again for the wrong that he hath done. You get into chapter 4, and he says, masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven. So how does this affect what's going on? Well, remember, those rich men hired laborers. They became employers to these employees that they didn't pay. Well, how do we respond to that? How do we answer that? How do we prevent? Well, remember, as an employer, you too have a master. You have one to whom you are answerable. And in this case, he says, your master is in heaven. But then, of course, to the employee, he focuses on, you do for your employer what you would do for the Lord. Do it heartily as unto the Lord. So if both the servant and the master implement the demands of the Lord through the Apostle Paul, that's going to fix that relationship. That's going to fix that disposition toward even material things, because now you're going to have the other individual of greater concern than even the material gain to be had. So it's going to help. Answer to the problem. Now, final problem that he mentions, Verse number 5, ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. Problem number 3, with this materialism, the wanton fashion of their life. And the idea here is that they have lived just for fleshly gratification. Their relationship to this material world, to material gains, to material things, is to live in gratification of self and live wastefully. There's a couple examples here, like in Luke chapter 15 and verse 13, where the one man, in that context, man wanted Jesus to, or Luke chapter 12 rather, verse 15 through 21, man wanted Jesus to talk to his brother about sharing the inheritance. And Jesus goes on to give some parables regarding covetousness. Beware of covetousness. And gives the parable of the rich farmer. Selfishly lived. Never thought about God who had blessed him with the bumper crop, and never thought about others who he may have been able to bless out of his abundance. All he thought about was self. He wasn't an overtly wicked man. He wasn't a murderer. He wasn't an adulterer. He wasn't an extortioner. There's a lot of things we could say he wasn't. But what he was selfish. And the Lord indicated that was an unacceptable disposition or focus in life. There's the prodigal son, who at the outset of the parable in Luke 15 and verse 13 took his inheritance that he demanded from his father and lived in riotous living, meaning he lived high on the hog. He just wasted all of it. Again, not overtly wicked. He wasn't a murderer, an extortioner, an adulterer, none of those things. But he was wasteful in the life, an extravagant life in such a fashion that was high on the hog, gratifying the flesh, with no consideration of either God or his fellow man. And so we're not necessarily looking at an immorally lived life or a life of wickedness, although it is an improper outlook on life to live for nothing but fleshly gratification and live wastefully. But notice also here, it led into another problem. It was a jumping off point in order to condemn and kill the just, even the one that doesn't resist. That selfishness led them to mistreat others. Being condemned means that they had accused them and determined them guilty. The accusation alone determined guilt. And it's something that even happens today. But one way in which they got their wealth was to take from others by accusation and assuming guilt, determining guilt. So their mistreatment of others. So you look at the way they're living and how that selfish living ended up driving them, it's wrong to live selfishly. It's wrong to live wantonly. It's wrong to live wastefully. It's wrong to live for nothing but fleshly gratification. But in living that way, it actually bloomed into other problems. Selfishness led to the mistreatment of other people. And with such an attitude or disposition toward material things, it's always going to lead to that kind of behavior. It's just inevitable. It's going to. Because all you think about is self, without consideration of anyone else, you're always going to end up mistreating others. It's just the nature of that game. So 3 problems that you had there. You had a problem with the fact that these material things were temporary. You had a problem in the way you acquired it, and you have a problem in the way you were using it, in the wanton fashion with which you lived. And even how that wanton lifestyle led you to mistreat others in the way that you interacted with them. So 3 major problems that are pointed out that these rich men had. And we don't want any of those. So how do we prevent it? How do we prevent that at all? Well, remember Joshua 24:15, where Joshua said, "Choose you this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." If we determine that we are going to serve God and not mammon, not material things, then we're going to be at the foundational point in which to build a life that doesn't have the wrong disposition toward material things. Ecclesiastes 12:13 says, "The whole of man is to fear God and keep his commandments," knowing that all those actions are going to be brought into the judgment day in verse number 14, whether it be good or bad, good or evil. But if we live our life so as to fear God, give due respect and reverence unto the Heavenly Father, so as to order our life by His commandments, then we're going to have the right disposition toward material things, as well as the right disposition toward Him and toward His creation, toward others. Galatians 6:2 says, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." We're going to recognize that helping others is part of what the law of Christ demands, and we're going to pursue that assistance to others, being of assistance to others in the bearing of their burdens. Mark chapter 12, verse 29 through 31 says, "The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God," or one Lord, "and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these." Great commandments, because when you love God and you love your fellow man the way you should, everything is going to be falling into place with your priorities, with your disposition toward material things, with your attitude toward others, as well as your attitude toward God. So, let's choose God. Let's have the right disposition toward material things. Now, James, it would seem, at least to me, that he is not condemning his readers for an improper relationship or disposition toward material things, but he is seeking to encourage them because they have been ill affected by individuals who have a wrong disposition toward material things. But whether we're the afflicted or the afflictee, we need to have, either develop or maintain, the right relationship, the right disposition, the right attitude toward material things if we're going to live the Christian life correctly. So may God bless us as we seek to understand the true nature of material things and understand the right relationship toward these material things, and with that then accomplish or carry out the right actions and disposition toward our fellow man. Until next week, may God bless us in our pursuit of the right attitude that will lead to the right action toward material things.